At a rain-soaked rail yard outside Yokohama, an American transport officer ordered a group of German prisoners on a separate trains, but their commander planted himself beside the final carriage and refused to move, while military police surrounded him. Because three of his men had vanished from the manifest, one sealed wagon had arrived without markings, and General Douglas MacArthur was already approaching before anyone could explain who had changed the orders. In October 1946, Major Robert Hale supervised the transfer of 87 German prisoners from a temporary camp near Yokohama to a coastal depot awaiting repatriation. Captain Friedrich Adler, the senior German officer, checked each name against a handwritten list as the men climbed into two passenger cars under American guard. When the second list arrived from headquarters, Hale found three names removed and marked for separate transport. Adler demanded to see the authority behind the change, but the paper carried only a typed logistics code and no officer's signature. Hale ordered the three men taken toward a sealed freight wagon standing beyond the platform. Adler stepped out of line and placed himself between the wagon and his men. He did not shout or threaten anyone, yet he refused Hale's order to board the passenger train until the missing names were restored. Military police moved around him while the other prisoners remained inside the carriage windows, watching the platform tighten around their commander. Hale opened the freight wagon and found 6 empty benches, 2 locked steel chests, and fresh straw covering dark stains on the floor. The escort sergeant claimed the car had arrived from an American warehouse, although its wheel markings showed that it had recently traveled from the docks. One of the 3 prisoners, Corporal Emil Vogel, slipped a folded scrap of paper from his sleeve and pushed it beneath Adler's boot before a guard pulled him away. Adler lifted the paper and saw a rough map of the harbor with a warehouse circled in pencil and the words "Before midnight" written in German. A staff car entered the yard before Hale could question Vogel, and General Douglas MacArthur stepped onto the platform with 2 aides after his route had been delayed by the blocked train. Hale explained that one German officer had stopped the transfer, while Adler handed over the unsigned order and the harbor map without asking for leniency. MacArthur compared the logistics code with the markings on the steel chests. The same number appeared on both, although the code belonged to a food shipment scheduled for Manila rather than a prisoner movement. He ordered the train held, the wagon isolated, and every man on the platform counted again. The new count revealed an additional prisoner listed aboard the train who had never left the camp. Hale telephoned the camp office, but the clerk who had prepared the manifest had disappeared after lunch, leaving his desk unlocked and a military vehicle missing from the yard. MacArthur directed military police to search the freight wagon without moving the chests. Inside the first chest, they found German identity papers, American ration books, and civilian clothing sorted by size. The second chest contained blank travel permits stamped with Allied seals. Adler then identified one photograph among the papers as a former German intelligence officer named Krantz, who had entered the camp months earlier under another prisoner's identity. The missing clerk's signature appeared beneath Krantz's false name, turning the disputed transfer into evidence of an escape network operating through American transport channels. MacArthur canceled the repatriation train and moved the prisoners into a guarded warehouse while investigators secured the yard. Adler remained beside his 3 men, but his refusal had now trapped the entire group in Japan and placed him at the center of a case involving forged documents, a vanished American clerk, and a sealed route to the harbor. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. Before dawn, MacArthur sent Hale and Adler to the original camp with a military police team because the missing clerk's vehicle had been found abandoned beside a drainage canal. The ignition key remained inside, while a wet boot print led from the driver's door toward the outer fence. The camp records room had been emptied of 3 months of transport files, yet the thieves had overlooked a carbon sheet beneath the clerk's typewriter. Hale rubbed pencil across it and recovered part of an order directing 12 prisoners to Warehouse 18 at Yokohama Harbor. Adler recognized 4 of the names as skilled radio operators who had never served in his unit. He led the investigators to their barracks, where the bunks contained rolled blankets instead of sleeping men and a floorboard concealed American cigarettes, Japanese currency, and a small transmitter. The transmitter activated when Hale turned its switch, broadcasting a repeated signal on a naval frequency. A nearby receiver answered with 3 clicks, proving that someone outside the camp was waiting for confirmation that the transfer had succeeded. MacArthur ordered the signal repeated under control while military police surrounded Warehouse 18. A delivery truck arrived 30 minutes later carrying fuel drums, and the driver presented an American pass bearing the same unsigned logistics code found at the rail yard. The truck tried to reverse when the gate closed behind it, but Hale blocked the exit with a jeep. Guards opened the drums and found radio parts, forged occupation currency, and wrapped packages of morphine taken from military hospitals. The driver identified himself as a Japanese contractor and denied knowing the cargo, although Adler saw a German regimental tattoo beneath the man's sleeve. The driver was actually one of Krantz's former sergeants, missing since the collapse of Germany and living under a Japanese name. During questioning, the sergeant revealed that Krantz planned to leave aboard a hospital ship using the identity of a wounded American civilian. He also claimed that one of Adler's 3 men had joined the network and carried the final passenger list. MacArthur returned to the guarded warehouse and ordered the 3 men searched separately. Vogel surrendered the harbor map and nothing else, while Sergeant Dietz carried a thin metal strip hidden inside his belt buckle, shaped to open the locks used on military document cases. Dietz broke from the search line, climbed a loading ladder, and crossed the roof toward an unguarded alley. Adler followed him across the beams and pulled him away from a loose skylight before military police reached the roof. Inside Dietz's boot, investigators found a hospital ship boarding card issued to an American technician who had died 2 weeks earlier. The reverse side carried a meeting time and a berth number scheduled for that evening. MacArthur changed the hospital ship's departure without announcing the delay and replaced its harbor crew with investigators. He then ordered Adler returned to the prisoners, warning that Dietz's betrayal could make every German in the group appear involved unless the remaining route was exposed before Krantz reached the docks. The delay at the harbor created an immediate consequence when occupation headquarters suspended all German repatriations from the region. Families waiting in Europe received no explanation, while Adler's men were moved from the warehouse into a fenced transit compound under stricter rules. A group of prisoners blamed Adler for stopping the train and demanded that he withdraw his testimony. When he refused, they overturned his bunk, seized the camp roster, and tried to burn the pages inside a metal stove before guards discovered the smoke. Adler pulled the roster from the flames and found that several names had been marked with small red dots. Vogel explained that the dots identified men whose families had received packages from an unknown relief office in Switzerland. Hale traced the relief office through Red Cross records and found that it did not exist. Every package had entered Japan through the same civilian shipping company that supplied Warehouse 18, connecting Krantz's escape network to payments made abroad. Before investigators could seize the company's office, a typhoon warning closed the harbor and forced all ships to remain at anchor. The hospital ship carrying the decoy crew moved away from its berth, removing the trap MacArthur had prepared. Krantz used the storm to enter the transit compound in the uniform of an American medical orderly and presented an evacuation order for 6 prisoners, claiming they had been exposed to contaminated water after the warehouse search. Vogel recognized Krantz, but could not reach the nearest guard because wind had torn down a section of telephone wire. He struck the compound's fire bell, drawing prisoners into the yard and forcing Krantz to abandon the medical truck. Krantz released its brake before running toward the damaged fence, sending the vehicle downhill toward a barracks filled with sleeping men. Adler and Hale climbed into the cab from opposite sides, and Hale steered while Adler forced the jammed brake lever downward. The truck stopped against a drainage wall, but falling debris injured two prisoners and crushed the compound's medical supplies. The storm then flooded the storage hut, leaving the camp without clean bandages or dry medicine. MacArthur diverted supplies from an officer's hospital and ordered engineers to repair the compound before nightfall. The decision drew protests from administrators who argued that occupation personnel should receive priority, yet he signed the release personally and sent the trucks through flooded streets. Krantz escaped the perimeter, but a torn section of his medical uniform remained on the fence. Inside its pocket, Hale found a railway locker key and a receipt for a package deposited at Tokyo Station that morning. When investigators opened the locker, they found the missing transport files and photographs of American officers entering clubs, offices, and private homes. The network had gathered material for blackmail, and one photograph showed the missing clerk alive beside Krantz after the supposed disappearance. The clerk's involvement forced MacArthur to suspend several transport officials and freeze every pending prisoner movement. Adler's men received the medicine they needed, but the camp gates remained closed. Their departure disappeared from the schedule, and the officer who had refused to leave them now faced open hostility from prisoners who believed his loyalty had cost them their last route home. The major reversal began when Vogel examined the recovered photographs and noticed that the missing clerk always wore his watch on the wrong wrist. Hale enlarged one image and discovered that the man beside Krantz was not the clerk, but a similar-looking prisoner trained to copy his posture. Military police searched the canal again and found the real clerk trapped inside a maintenance chamber beneath the road, weak but alive. He explained that Krantz had forced him to prepare manifests, then replaced him with the double when he tried to alert headquarters. The clerk identified Dietz as the man who delivered forged orders, but he cleared Adler's 3 men of joining the network voluntarily. Vogel had entered Warehouse 18 only to copy the harbor map, while the third prisoner, Otto Weiss, had been threatened because his brother worked aboard the hospital ship. MacArthur returned the original repatriation date to the schedule and released the transit compound from collective restriction. He then placed Adler in temporary command of the German barracks under American supervision, reversing the assumption that his refusal had endangered the group. The recovered files showed that Krantz had hidden his final escape plan inside a legitimate food convoy bound for a remote occupation post. MacArthur ordered the convoy to continue, but replaced one driver and concealed military police inside the last truck. Adler rode with Hale because Krantz would recognize an unfamiliar American search team, but might approach a vehicle carrying German prisoners. At a mountain checkpoint, a Japanese constable waved the convoy onto a side road that did not appear on the official route. The trucks entered an abandoned airfield where Krantz waited beside a small transport plane marked with civilian relief symbols. Several crates from the convoy had already been unloaded, and the prisoner double stood near the aircraft wearing the missing clerk's uniform. Krantz ordered the convoy guards to surrender, believing they were members of his network, but Adler stepped from the lead truck and called the German helpers by their real names. 2 men lowered their tools immediately, while the prisoner double ran toward the plane. Hale's hidden team emerged from the final truck and blocked the runway. The pilot started the engines, forcing Adler and Hale to move behind the aircraft while loose crates slid across the ground. Weiss, who had been brought to identify his brother's documents, discovered the brother locked inside one crate with 2 hospital workers. He broke the wooden side with an iron bar and pulled them clear before the aircraft began moving. Krantz climbed aboard and ordered the pilot forward, but the freed hospital worker drove a supply truck across the runway. The plane struck a drainage ditch at low speed, damaging its landing gear and ending the escape without reaching the air. Investigators opened the remaining crates and found the stolen morphine, Allied seals, blackmail photographs, and lists of families used to pressure prisoners into cooperation. The evidence proved that Adler's refusal at the rail yard had not delayed justice but prevented dozens of men from being scattered before they could expose the network. MacArthur ordered Krantz and the collaborators taken to separate facilities, while the rescued clerk reclaimed control of the transport office. For the first time, Adler's men learned that their commander's decision had preserved their names, their witnesses, and their chance to leave together rather than keeping them imprisoned in Japan. 3 days later, the repatriation train returned to the Yokohama platform with Adler's full company listed on one signed manifest. MacArthur attended only long enough to inspect the document, but a final message arrived before boarding began, reporting that Dietz had escaped from custody during transfer. Dietz entered the rail yard through a maintenance tunnel and reached the signal cabin wearing an American work jacket. He locked the operator outside, switched the departure track, and directed the prisoner's train toward a freight line ending at the harbor fuel depot. Hale noticed the signal change after the locomotive began moving and ran beside the first carriage, but the train gathered speed before he could reach the cab. Adler broke the emergency glass inside the prisoner car and pulled the alarm chain, which had been disconnected. MacArthur ordered the yard power cut, yet the locomotive continued on momentum toward the depot. Engineers warned that a collision with the parked fuel wagons could destroy the platform and the nearby barracks. Adler opened the carriage door and crossed the exterior connection to the baggage car while his men passed a rope forward from compartment curtains. Hale climbed aboard from a parallel maintenance engine and joined him near the locomotive tender. Dietz left the signal cabin and drove a rail cart onto the main line behind them, carrying the last case of forged records and enough fuel to burn the evidence. Military police pursued from the yard but could not fire near the tanks. Hale reached the locomotive cab and found the engineer unconscious from a blow to the head. Adler held the brake wheel while Hale opened the sand valves, but the damaged system slowed only one side of the train and threatened to derail the passenger cars. The German prisoners used the rope to secure themselves and shifted together toward the opposite side as the train entered a curve. Their coordinated movement kept the rear carriages upright while Adler forced the brake another turn. MacArthur's engineers switched an empty maintenance spur ahead of the fuel depot. The locomotive entered the spur, struck a sand barrier, and stopped with the final carriage still on the main line. Dietz's rail cart followed too quickly and overturned before the switch. He escaped the wreck with the records case, ran onto the platform, and tried to throw it into a furnace used by railway workers. Vogel blocked the furnace door with a coal shovel, while Weiss pulled a fire hose across Dietz's path. Hale seized the case, and American military police restrained Dietz before he could destroy the last manifests. The recovered papers listed every false identity, payment, and threatened family used by Krantz's network. MacArthur signed an order making the evidence part of the occupation archive and barring any transport officer from altering Adler's company roster. The damaged train could not continue, so military trucks carried the Germans directly to the waiting ship. Adler refused the first vehicle until his wounded men, Vogel, Weiss, and the others were counted aboard, but this time Hale handed him the signed manifest and invited him to verify every name. Adler climbed into the final truck after the last man took his seat. The convoy left the yard under a clear route order, while Dietz, Krantz, and their records remained behind under guard, making the departure irreversible and ending the network's power to separate the men again. At the harbor, Adler stood at the gangway until the final stretcher was carried aboard, then gave Hale the worn list he had used since the first camp. MacArthur's signed manifest replaced it in his pocket, bearing every name and no hidden code. As the ship pulled away, Hale opened the old paper and found one sentence written beneath the roster. An officer leaves after his men. On shore, MacArthur watched the vessel clear the breakwater, while the sealed evidence case traveled toward trial and the complete company traveled home. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more untold WW2 stories.